Good morning, everyone. We're going to let folks come on in before we get started in just a minute or so. Welcome. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to wait just a few more seconds as people are still filing in. Great. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. Good morning. My name is Sarah Rubin. I am the Department of Conservation's Outreach and Engagement Coordinator. We're very happy to be with you all here today. Thanks for joining us. In just a moment, we are going to do introductions and I'll talk about what's going to happen over the hour. But the very first thing that we are going to do is we are going to talk about how Spanish interpretation works. So if we want to go to that slide, LD. There we go. All right, Miguel, can I hand it over to you?
Yeah, of course you can. This is Miguel Alatorre with the Green Action for Health and Environmental Justice. And I just wanted to go through some of the interpretation stuff in Spanish in case you needed it. Interpretación de idiomas en Zoom. Tendremos servicio de interpretación en español. Si algún asistente desea escuchar esta presentación en español, busque en su pantalla este icono de interpretación. It's labeled Interpretation. Ahora verá los canales de idiomas. Haga clic en Español Spanish. Para escuchar solo en español, haga clic en Silenciar audio original, Mute Original Audio. Observación. Para usar la función de interpretación de idioma, los participantes tienen que descargar la aplicación de Zoom en su desktop, teléfono inteligente o tableta. Para ayuda técnica o de interpretación de idioma, envíe un mensaje a engagewithus2020@gmail.com. Esta sesión está siendo grabada. Al unirse a este seminario web, acepta ser grabado. Gracias.
Thank you, Miguel. All right, Deldy, perfect. Okay, so more folks have come in just in the last minute. Welcome. And as I look through the list, there's so many people that I wish I had time to say hi to, including people I've gone to school with or people that I've worked with. We're so glad you're here. Miguel just introduced himself. Miguel, I might have you do that one more time. I'm going to circle back around. Deldy, can you introduce yourself to everyone?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here with you today and this wonderful panel. And I want to welcome you to the webinar. My name is Deldy Reyes, and I work for the California Environmental Protection Agency as the Environmental Justice Program Manager.
Thank you. Jessica.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jessica Bean. I am the Assistant Director of the Office of Public Participation with the State Water Resources Control Board, and I'm very happy to be here today.
Thank you. Miguel, for the folks who maybe have come in the last 30 seconds, could you introduce yourself one more time, please?
Yeah, hi everyone. This is Miguel Alatorre with Green Action for Health and Environmental Justice. I'm the policy advocate and community organizer out of Kettleman City, California in the Central Valley.
Great. And we have our public engagement intern, Avery, with us. Avery, can you introduce yourself?
My name's Avery. I use she, they pronouns. I'm the public engagement intern, and I'll be monitoring the chat and the Q&A. So ask all your questions, and I'll try to interact with them throughout the webinar.
Great. Thank you. So what we have planned for this hour is we are going to have Jessica talk about some recent lessons learned. Miguel is going to talk about latest trends and observations. And we are planning to have plenty of time for Q&A. So throughout the hour, just as we go, anytime a question comes up for you, please put it right into the Q&A function. Use the chat function if you're having any challenges whatsoever. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Deldy.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, panelists. So just for a little refresher, it has been such a long time for those of you who attended our conference in June online. So very much has happened since then. And at the time that Sarah and I and this wonderful team of people were planning that conference, there was, so much happening as well. We really struggled with the timing. We were 3 months into lockdown, sheltering in place. It was only 8 days after the killing of George Floyd at the hands of police. It was very much a stressful time for so many of us, and we struggled with how to lift up the challenges that those of us in government who work with communities and with the public were having ourselves as we were trying to adapt to this virtual world. And Sarah, I actually am going to turn it back to you. I have someone at my front door. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Great. So I will go ahead if you want to go. Oh, Deldy has the slides. All right. So there are 3 different ways that you can participate today. The chat function, the Q&A, and then we are going to use a tool called Poll Everywhere. And then while we are waiting for Deldy to come back to start our first poll, and then which the instructions are on the next slide, why don't we use the chat function right now for you all to share, one thing you're hoping to get out of this webinar today? What's something you hope that we will touch on? Why don't everyone just take a moment and put your thought into the chat? We'll give you a second to do that. One thing you would like to hear or get out of today's webinar. Let's see, new skills, best practices, virtual, not visual, the resources available, new platforms to use, best ways to engage, getting participants to be more responsive, engaging the audience, lessons learned and new tools. Great. Equitable, how to stay equitable. This is very helpful. So, great. Deldy, you're back.
Yeah, everyone, I'm so sorry for that interruption. What I wanted to do was to share with you a couple of ways that we can engage today using what we call instant polling. And we're doing this in 2 different ways. You can use your phone to send a text. And you can see on the left-hand column how to do that. The text that you're going to send is the code there. That's got my name, DReyes391. And you're going to text it to that number, 22333. And all you got to do is wait for a response, wait for the question, and then go ahead and text your response. You can also just open up another window on your browser and go to the website that's described there and just wait for the question to appear. And here's our first poll of the session. So this is just to get us used to using the tool. I'm sure by now many of us have used tools like this before. And it's great to see all the positive things that folks have been picking up. Great. All right, let's keep going. Here is another poll to just get a sense of whether how much of our audience was actually able to attend any part of the conference back in June. So this is great. almost half of us were able to attend at least part of the conference. Thanks for that. And I'm going to give it 2 more seconds. And I'm going to go on and ask, in the email invitation that you got from Sarah for the webinar today, there was a link to the catalog of videos from the conference. And so our next question is about whether you might have had a chance to review the catalog or not. Or maybe you're curious, like, what are you talking about? What catalog? So this will just give us a sense of how many folks have had a chance to go and visit the site. So good, I'm glad to see that a few folks were able to pick up on a session that they missed. And it looks like we have a fair number of folks who are just curious about the catalog. Great. And so what I'd like to do now is turn to Avery Kaplan, who's been a member of our team, and she's got a great video to show you.
Yeah, so if you've gotten the chance to check out the resource catalog, you might have seen sort of all of the video resources and print resources from the June conference. And what I did was I just put together basically a trailer for the 20 hours of video you'll find in that resource catalog, so everybody can get a taste of, what kind of speakers and sessions and questions were covered and that you'll find in that catalog. So James, if you'd mind playing that video.
So welcome everybody to the brave new world of community engagement. Here we are online, several hundred people talking about how democracy works when people cannot get together in a public forum in person.
My name is Sherry Davis, and our session is about opportunities to engage all and bridge divides.
Thank you for the opportunity to share with you a little bit about, and with everyone, about our organization, which is Mixteco Indígena Community Organizing Project.
I've been invited here today to speak about the future of equitable engagement, and I intend to do that by drawing to 2 lessons that are being read in protests against police brutality and the killing of Black lives.
When we look at a public budget, we have the opportunity to think about where we can make some decisions together. Once we design the process and determine what the goals of the process are, we collect ideas, hundreds, if not thousands of ideas. This is the radical imagination part. How would you use this pot of funds to make your community better, to make it safer?
My personal view is it should not be a barrier. Us speaking our indigenous languages, moving around our America continent should not be a barrier. So, but it's when it comes to having access to services, it is a barrier. So another effort is that we're working with the local law enforcement on helping them to interact with indigenous communities in our areas. Sometimes we want to make sure that our people carry this card, that by the time that they're being stopped by the law officer, that they show this card saying, I need a Mixteco interpreter.
Political Voice works primarily on 4 issues. One is the census, another is redistricting, third is voting and election systems, and the 4th is public participation in governance, or what some folks refer to as democracy beyond elections.
That is the exact same design principle that we have to use right now. I think that while things feel maybe a little bit scattered and really hard, we have to continue to keep communication channels open with community, and we have to continuously allow them to design. And the first question is, how can you participate?
This is very important. It's very frustrating for providers when they interact with indigenous speakers sometimes. Why? Because they want our people to go to the point. That's how you speak probably in this culture. Like, tell me to this point. Don't go around. Don't tell me, I don't need this extra information. But one thing is, that's how we communicate. That's a way our communities do want to make sure that you really understand you have the whole story, the whole spectrum of what exactly happens. And it may not take 1 minute or 2 or 5 minutes. It might take like 15, 20 minutes because people really want to tell you the story.
If the future of engagement is to be equitable, then I think we all have a lot of work ahead of us. Thank you.
Avery, thank you so much for pulling that compilation of clips from the over 20 hours of videotape that we have. It really seems to me, you know, having been through the conference, that you really landed on some of the really compelling remarks that our speakers made that still hold true even more today as we reflect on the experience of this last week, as we reflect on our role as public participation practitioners. In a way, you know, we can think of that as being on the front lines of democracy in our country, and what, you know, can we do to sustain democracy in the day-to-day practice of our work for government. And so, Avery, is there anything else you wanted to say about the video?
Not really, just that I hope people take the time to sort of go through the resource catalog and think about ways that they can, you know, maybe not play like the entire 3-hour video at an event, but, you know, pull a 15-minute talk from one of the activists or, you know, professionals or any of the people sort of speaking in those videos and sort of incorporate it into your own work, your own presentations. I think it's just, yeah, great to elevate everything that was covered at the conference. And you're right, it's all still super relevant.
Thank you. I think I might have seen a comment in the chat about a challenge somebody was having with the link. We will make sure to double check that link, and everyone who registered today will get a thank you email. And so you will get that link again. And great, thank you folks for looking ahead at our next poll. I'm asking you to share one word, and you can do that 3 separate times, about, you know, what comes to mind when you think about online engagement today. If you have to use a phrase, that's fine, but put a little hyphen so it stays connected. Yeah, challenging by far. Sarah, any reflections you have?
It's just really fun to see the, you know, it's always fun with these kinds of things when the certain words get bigger. And I wonder if, while we're waiting for these to come in, Deldy, you could want to respond to this later, but one thing that came into the chat was the plus and minuses of using the Zoom feature, the polls from Zoom versus an outside tool like this. I don't know if you want to say anything now or maybe later about that.
Yeah, I'll just quickly mention a couple. Separate tools, such as this one we're using, Poll Everywhere, do offer a little more flexibility. There are character limits when you use the Zoom polls. So you have to keep your questions very, very short. And if you're trying to have both English and Spanish on one line, you often are not able to do that. And so this particular tool allows us to do that, and it can be made seamless in your PowerPoint deck.
Yeah, Natalie shared that they use Mentimeter, and I've been to quite a few meetings where Mentimeter has been used. It's a great tool also. And then Deldy and I both have used a tool called Meeting Sift. That's another tool we used back in June also. So there's definitely quite a few good ones out there. I think the last thing I would add from the person in the chat is the main thing is practicing. Especially if you're going to use an outside tool, you really need to practice before your event so you feel comfortable with it. So
and many of the tools offer you free accounts with, you know, fewer numbers of people that can sign in, and so those are great ways to practice.
Yeah. Okay, so for the sake of time, I'm going to keep us going. Hopefully everyone is enjoying this word cloud. So what's going to happen next is I'm going to actually show you all live the web page. So Del, do you want to, perfect, stop sharing, and then I'm going to share my screen. So I know Avery is dropping the link, if she hasn't already, to this resource catalog. It starts with me, obviously in the middle of a sentence, with a little welcome video. And then as you scroll down, here are the 4 big areas of content for you to explore. The first, this 20 hours of video that we have been talking about. You just click these links, and then you see the video, pops right up, the English and the Spanish with the closed captions. And then a lot of you all probably have already seen the print resources. These have been up since the conference, but all of the PowerPoint slides, the original flyers, the detailed agenda, and then we have a whole section about our fabulous 59 different panelists that we had back in June. So we just really encourage you, when you have a moment here and there, to go through and check it out. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And we are now ready to go over to Jessica, who is going to share some of her recent lessons learned. And I'm going to let you just take it right away. Go ahead.
Thanks, Sarah. And Aldi's pulling up the slides now. So here we go. Thanks. Hi, I'm Jessica Bean again. I am with the State Water Resources Control Board, our Office of Public Participation. And so before I kind of get into the lessons learned right now, I wanted to share a little analogy with you. If you want to go to the next slide, Deldy. Thanks. So I recently heard a great analogy about remote engagement that I want to share with you. And this is a photo of early Los Angeles from 1902. So at this point, cars were just beginning to share the road with horse-drawn wagons, electric streetcars, bicycles, and pedestrians. So people were generally getting where they needed to go, but there were a lot of, were not a lot of rules of the road at that point, and there were likely a lot of mistakes and accidents. In fact, we know there were a lot of accidents. So I think this is essentially where we are with our remote engagement right now, even this far in this many months, almost a year at this point into it. So we can think of the cars in this situation as our broadband internet or our Zoom and online meetings. I like to think of the streetcars as email or text messages, the bicycles as phone calls, maybe some fax machines. Do you remember fax machines? We still use fax machines. And then the pedestrians you can think about as paper mail. So like this photo where there were many methods for traveling, we now have many methods to connect with our stakeholders remotely, but it's still pretty messy and we're still trying to figure out the rules. So for this lessons learned section of our webinar, I'm going to share some reflections from the office I work with, but I'd also really like to hear from you because I think we could benefit from a variety of perspectives. And I'm seeing in the chat when Sarah asked the question about what you want to learn is there's definitely a lot of questions and we probably can't get to address all of them in this short time, but I definitely think we can get a nice, robust conversation. Next slide. So what have we learned? So my office has learned that change is hard, but our staff were up for the challenge. So we moved 100% of our in-person meetings to online platforms in a matter of weeks, which is no small feat. To do this, my team familiarized ourselves with the various online platforms and became remote engagement liaisons for our organization. There were essentially about 10 to 12 of us doing this for an organization of about 2,500 people. So we developed guidance documents and templates, we provided trainings and facilitated countless public meetings until we could get most of our staff comfortable with this new online process. This was great. It prevented a complete standstill in our community engagement efforts. And with that, it allowed us to continue our regulatory work because we are a regulatory organization. But right now we're at a point where most of our water board staff are comfortable coordinating and facilitating online meetings. So now my team is able to take a step back and really step away from being logistical managers and think about remote engagement more critically. Next slide.
Hey, Jessica, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the interpretation's having a hard time keeping up with you because you're speaking a little fast. If you could go just a little slower.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No, it is a common mishap of mine. I will try my best. So here is where we are right now. We see many advantages to remote engagement. So as an example, online meetings are often easier to schedule. They can require little to no travel and are more cost effective for many participants, which is great because it can increase attendance. Likewise, email correspondence is certainly less expensive for us, and it can be a faster alternative to paper mail. Next slide. So at this point, I would like to pause and see if folks have seen other advantages that they can share in the chat. So if you can go to your Zoom chat box and just type in some of the advantages that you're finding through your own activities. So it says we're able to meet more often, higher attendance at virtual events, efficiency, fewer logistics. It's easier for quieter people to share, broader geographical outreach. This is great. Flexibility, being able to use a computer or a tablet or a phone. Folks really like the chat feature if they're not comfortable speaking out. That's great. More community members are being reached. I like this one. People don't tend to speak over each other. We've definitely learned how to do that a little bit more. And then tempers the mood for insightful participants. More engagement with grassroots communities, easier to record, easier to mute people who speak out of order. That's great. So I encourage you to continue sharing as we go on, and folks who are interested in learning, please take advantage of looking at the chat. So next slide, please. So on the flip side, we actually have seen quite a few disadvantages as well to remote meetings. So we're finding that the remote engagement is taking more time to implement and plan for us. For example, our online meetings tend to require more staff to handle technical issues and meeting logistics on the back end. So we're doing a lot more planning. And while the meeting has time, and then in addition to that, the meeting times tend to have to be shorter because people tend to have shorter attention spans online. So we're easily distracted. I bet a large portion of you are looking at your email or your phone right now. So it's just really a challenge that we're dealing with. It's also really hard to build trust and relationships in this virtual environment. I'm hoping that we're getting used to that a little bit more. But even if you can use breakout rooms or online engagement tools, it's really nothing beats that face-to-face meeting, especially if you're having really important discussions. Another big challenge for us is an increase in the number of public meetings in general and workshops in general. I think somebody mentioned this in the chat. In-person meetings require meeting space and travel time, and those are limited. So we often have to be very careful with our scheduling. But now we can book a virtual meeting room anytime. So people aren't looking to see if their scheduling is conflicting with other important topics being discussed that day or even that week. And so while we want our stakeholders to be involved, it seems like we might be collectively asking for a lot more time than they have to give to us. And then finally, for us, it's we're trying to address the digital divide, which is essentially the gap between people who have reliable, consistent access to both the internet and digital communications, and then the folks that don't. So this inequity is particularly evident for us when we're holding community meetings in rural areas, where many of our participants have to use a phone line to call into their meetings because they don't have access to the internet, or they don't have a computer or a smart device, or maybe they're just not comfortable with technology. So even with a call-in line, when we have something like a Zoom meeting, the phone users are still at a disadvantage because the meetings are geared for online users who can see the PowerPoint or chart or the document that is being referenced by the presenter. So our phone user has to guess. And in essence, we're creating two groups within our meeting. So we're dividing our meeting, those who have access to all of the information, and then those who do not have access to all of the information. Next slide. So in terms of bridging this digital divide, this is really one of the areas that my team is focusing on right now. We're looking at solutions like strictly using conference phone calls without an online option when we have public meetings in certain areas so that we can level the playing field. We're also looking into potentially offering free loaner computers or Wi-Fi hotspots to folks who don't have access to that. And then also looking into offering free general internet training. Deldy, I have someone at my door now too, so my dogs are going crazy. I apologize. So in our initial, next slide, please. So in our initial transition to online meetings, I think many of our staff had hoped to connect to more of the communities who weren't able to travel to Sacramento to engage with us. We've seen a bit of that, but not as much as we'd hoped. And in general, most of our participants are those we've already engaged with before the pandemic. And so we're still missing a lot of hard to reach communities like low-income households, limited technology users, limited English speakers, people with literacy needs, and people who can't meet during traditional business hours, because as we're doing today, a lot of our meetings are happening at times when it may be more difficult for those folks to engage. So essentially, the challenges of reaching hard to reach communities exist just as much, if not more so, in the virtual environment. Next slide. So one of my colleagues has a great analogy to sum things up. In fact, I think that person may be on the line today. So when Jen was a child, her father took her to the fair where she played the fishbowl game. So take a moment, and if you can just give me a yes in the chat if you are familiar with the fishbowl game. Yes, have some yeses coming in. Nopes. Okay, so we do have some people who do not know about the fishbowl game. All right, if you're not familiar, here are the basics. There's a table full of fish bowls. You are given a basket of ping pong balls to throw at the fish bowls. And for every ball you get into a bowl, you get a goldfish as a prize. So Jen really, really wanted a goldfish. So she got her basket of ping pong balls and she carefully aimed each of her ping pong balls at the bowls on the table, and she didn't get a single ball into the bowl. But when Jen's dad played, instead of throwing those ping pong balls individually, he threw all the balls at one time, and Jen ended up with 5 goldfish. So this is all to say that when we're trying to connect with stakeholders, we're more successful when we use multiple communication tools rather than one. And within those tools, we need a variety of both digital and non-digital options so we can reach a broader audience. So with that in mind, I want to wrap things up once again by asking for you to share your thoughts on how we can address this digital divide or any of the issues I've mentioned. So in this case, you can ask a question in the Q&A, you can type some things into the chat, and maybe we can discuss them. I want to open it up and make it useful. Let's see, we have some Q&A coming in here.
I believe also that perhaps it was Larry who raised his hand.
Oh, good. Yeah, raise your hand, and if we can unmute people to share, that would be fantastic.
And you guys, I'm thinking maybe we take 1 or 2 questions now before we go to Miguel, and then we can have the balance of the Q&A after
Sure, that
Miguel.
sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, so if anyone wants to raise their hand, let's see, we have, how do we engage millennials and young adults to get involved more often? That's a very good question. Does anyone want to?
This is
I'm wondering if we
Miguel.
should come. Yeah, go ahead, Miguel.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of add my thoughts into the question that was just asked about engaging millennials more frequently. So I work with Green Action for Health and Environmental Justice, and we usually, in our Zoom trainings kind of target youth per se, because that's we have a lot of youth in Kettleman City that are involved and like to know more about what's going on in their environment and stuff. And so some of the things that we've been doing is integrating social media into all Zooms. So when we advertise a Zoom, we try to get the word out there as much as possible. So that includes using Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all the social medias to kind of promote what we're doing and like why they should join it. And one of the biggest things was mentioned before, I think by Jessica, is that attention spans are very, very short online. And so you might want to focus on making those messages very short, but very sweet in essence. So very to the point. That's just my 2 cents on what we've been doing with engaging millennials per se, or youth. So, it is tough. Trust me. It is tough to get their attention. They do Zoom on school or for school now, so it's even harder. They're much more fatigued than we are because they do Zoom like 8 hours a day. So we have to really look out for that and make sure that the Zooms are timed adequately, like usually nothing more than an hour. But if anyone has a different experience, they could chime in.
There's a lot of great chats coming in here. Let's see, having trouble scrolling. Here we go.
Jessica?
Yes.
I would just add in one other thing to add on to Miguel. I agree with everything you said. I often am really, for youth, but for other specific communities we're trying to connect with, I'm often thinking about a grass tops approach. So you're looking at who can help you get the word out, who's going to be your messenger that's going to be more effective than you because of their connections. And then, as Miguel said, it's been just pounded into my head of short. And attractive visuals, or like a 6-second video, or 12 seconds, or something very short.
Absolutely. These are great. And looks like if some of folks are just talking about pairing different things. Adriana mentions pairing up with local libraries. They may have loaner computers that people can use within their community. So if we don't have the capacity to do it on our own. Let's see. Rosemary says, I found blogs, electronic newsletters, and community resources helpful to get the word out within their communities. Let's see. And I can't see the name of this one. It says, like the analogy lesson I learned from discouragement, and keep going, just keep sharing. We've been embedding SurveyMonkey survey links in meeting chats at the end to get feedback immediately. That's great.
And
That's great.
Jessica, our colleague Sue Woods asked in the Q&A if you might be able to share some of the documents you alluded to in terms of resources, templates.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to do that. I have to think about how I can get that out to this group because right now it's on an internal server, but I think we can make that happen. Absolutely.
Thank you.
So I wonder if now, Jessica, and we could come back to more of these as they're shared. I wonder if now is a great time to transition to Miguel. I'm keeping it. Does that sound good?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great. So if we want to, there we go. Perfect. Thank you, Deldy. All right. Miguel, my favorite view of you.
Yeah,
Take it
I
away.
have a crazy room back here. So, hello everyone. This is Miguel Alatorre with Green Action for Health and Environmental Justice. And the biggest thing we could say right now when it comes to engagement, just getting right to it, is the virus, the coronavirus. It's something that a lot of people like to skip when we're doing these kind of webinars. Like, it's like all of a sudden all our culture just switched onto online meetings, and no one is kind of talking about the elephant of the room. As why is that reason we're doing that? So we like to tell our community members and our constituents that we engage with virtually. The reason we do this is because we're for health above anything else. And so we would never put your guys' health at risk by trying to do the in-person stuff when, this virus is, sorry, I guess my speaker is low. Is that better, everyone? Sorry.
That's
I guess
totally better. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. And so everyone forgets to mention that, and we definitely try to do our best when we reach out to both young adults, youth, and the older folks in Kettleman. This is the reason why we're doing online, because a lot of the times they ask, why don't you guys come door to door anymore? Or why don't you guys post flyers and stuff like you used to? And we tell them it's to protect our own health and your health as well. We want to minimize all the interactions that we can. So that's what we try to do. In terms of what we've been doing, so another question that you need to ask yourself when you use the digital engagement platforms is what is the point? Not to sound rude, but it's like what is your target audience, or like what are you trying to get across? So I see like this webinar is really big, like there's 200 participants. And so when the webinar's this big, it tends to take away from that one-on-one. So at Green Action, we have two different kinds. We have these big webinars like we're on right now when we want to kind of do toxic tours, or when we want to showcase a specific community and show what they're going through and ways that you can help that specific community. But let's take, for instance, something like a youth academy, which is what we do a lot here at Green Action. We do youth academies where we teach, youth or young adults about their environment and how they can get involved in protecting it. And when we do those, we tend to keep the class size, or the, size of the actual participants very, very low. So it's always going to be below 20 participants. And that's because I did see a lot of comments and questions that say, how do you keep people engaged, or what can we do to, bridge that gap of like, yeah, I can be on this webinar, but I'm also on my cell phone on the side. So how do we minimize those things? And I honestly believe it's by having smaller meetings. In our experience with Green Action, when we do small Zooms, like let's say it's under 10 participants, and we have them at different times of the day to accommodate different constituents or different partners or community members. We always, kind of flesh out the reason, like, why are we putting on this Zoom, and what can we do to best accommodate those with like the low tech, or people that are not so tech savvy. So sometimes it unfortunately takes a lot of hard work. As Jessica was mentioning, it sometimes takes a team, unfortunately. And I know not everyone has that resource, but sometimes it comes down to being one-on-one with that one community member or that one youth that's not too familiar with the technology, and kind of either walking through it with them virtually, or just kind of taking any questions that they may have until they kind of have a more solid grasp of how to use the feature set of Zoom and stuff like that. And right now I'm also looking at the chat, and I know there's a bunch of questions. So instead of just recapping what I've recapped before on what we do, I'm also going to answer your guys' questions the best I can. So I see virtual engagement best practices on the question and answer. And what we like to do at Green Action is usually when we start off, whether it be a youth academy or a really big webinar, or something like an Ivan meeting, or a task force meeting, we tend to start those meetings off by kind of describing, the basic Zoom etiquette, like don't have your muted, don't be unmuted when you have like a bunch of stuff going on in the background. You're cooking some eggs or frying something up, and it's all over the place, or there's a lot of dogs barking in the background. Not to point you out, Jessica, but we get that sometimes here in Kettleman because there's a lot of strays and they're barking in the background. So we teach everyone, kind of the do's and do nots of Zoom. Like, hey guys, this is the best way to do it. or like if you have a question, here's the raise your hand feature or the chat feature. So just fleshing out that, and I know it becomes repetitive, but like I said, this is really new ground. It's not something we're used to doing every day. Like we've all switched our culture to being online 24/7 now, not just for pleasure, but now also for business and community engagement. And so we have to take that into account. Um, Let me go to other question. How are Latino populations who are not experienced with online engagement? What are participation levels? How are they engaging? What solutions do you employ? So specifically Latino populations, that's a good question for Kettleman because that's mostly what we have. We're about 99% Latino. There's no Caucasian or African American people. So it's really mostly just Latinos. And the way we get them to participate is we kind of make sure that they know that it's everywhere. You know how sometimes we come onto meetings and we're like, oh my goodness, where's the link at? How do I join? What's the passcode? Why am I in a waiting room? We tend to minimize all those things as much as we can by creating really big social media posts, like I've mentioned before. I'm sure you guys have seen our Facebook posts at one time or another if you follow us on social media. And if you don't, please look up Green Action on Facebook and Instagram. But we make sure that it is as easy as possible to access the links. We make sure it's as easy as possible to understand the agenda and what's the point of the meeting. And we tend to get a lot better participation because a lot of the raza is really to the point. They don't like to beat around the bush. They like the straight, what are we doing here and what are we going to do about it approach. So that's how we tend to do it in Kettleman. I see another question coming in is, have you tried Facebook Live events for older generations? We've done many Facebook Lives, and when you look at your statistics, if you actually do Facebook Live quite a bit, it will give you your statistics on like meetings or like who's joining from like what locations in the United States and stuff like that. I don't want to get all into it, but once you integrate your social media platform into Zoom, it gives you all kinds of extra stuff. And so, yeah, we definitely have like a really variable age. We have like a lot of youth, like I said, but we also have like a lot of people over 40. I think what we have to thank for that is Green Action's been doing a lot of work with CEJC and training up some of the older generations or some folks that kind of have the technical difficulties with like computers and stuff. And so I know CEJC, the California Environmental Justice Coalition, just recently got a grant where they were able to give a lot of the grassroots organizations around the Central Valley access to Wi-Fi hotspot discounts and computers and stuff like that. And I know that's not a resource that everyone has, but it has done really well in our community with getting everyone on it and getting more participation from the Zoom meetings. Next question is, how do we keep up with the ever-evolving platforms and the confusing array of options? It's hard to learn one, only to learn that another may be better. So the way I would answer that question is with the real life example. Green Action started on Zoom pretty early because we realized that unfortunately this pandemic was going to last a lot longer than just the initial 2, 3, 4 month lockdown. And so we were thinking, how are we going to make our task force meetings, our Ivan meetings, and other community engagement meetings sustainable for the future with this kind of pandemic going on. And we just decided to stick to Zoom. And as you know, Google Meetings, Google Platforms, and Microsoft Teams and all that kind of stuff was coming out, we tended to just stick to Zoom and never used anything else. And it's not because those other platforms are bad or anything. It's just, like you said, it's very confusing to keep up with all of the tech that's going on all the time, the constant updates. And so what we do in Green Action as well is kind of designate all those updates and digital tasks to just one person on the staff, and that's usually myself or my coworker Dalila. And so we remind people to stay updated on Zoom. Like I know Bradley, you guys probably know Bradley a time or two, but that guy is not good with updating his computer. And so we have to constantly remind him like, hey, Bradley, you need to press update on your laptop. you need to re-download the Zoom app. And we also tend to do that for all the kids in our youth academies, but they're really on it because they use Zoom for schools. But like our other constituents, like the older generation, you could say, we also have to remind them like, hey, if you guys could please keep on top of your Zoom updates, or if we could bring our Wi-Fi hotspots near your house so you can download it. Because I know like most people have iPhones or whatever. Most of them do have hotspots if that's in your carrier plan, and you don't have to be inside somebody's house to give them access. And that's a special thing about the Kettleman City community, is so we're very small, 1,500 people, and we're very tight knit. So I know if my neighbor's having trouble with Wi-Fi, he can text me or he can call me, and I can just drive outside his house and be like, hey, my Wi-Fi spot's on if you need to download that so we can get this meeting going. So I know those are different things, but those are just things that we've had to adapt to in this pandemic. And I see another question, and then maybe I'm out of
hey,
time or whatever. I'll go
Well,
ahead.
I was just gonna say, as we have about 9 minutes left, and I know some people have other meetings right at the top of noon, could we do a quick check-in, Avery, of there any questions we want to elevate? And then maybe Miguel, it will make sense for you to dive in on those, or Jessica or Deldy. And actually, Deldy, I also want to say, I'm giving, if there's any last thought you have before we lose you, I'd love for you to share too.
I just want to thank our panelists. Miguel, I know you have so much to deal with right now, and I appreciate you being here and all the wise words from your practice that you've shared with our group today. Thank you. Jessica, you as well. I know you and your team have been doing amazing work in the water boards to try to adapt and be flexible. I will probably be removing myself in just a few minutes, but I hope the conversation continues with the Q&A. And I also want to thank all our panelists who made time to show up today. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Deldy. Avery, any questions?
Yeah, I just want to elevate a question from Adrienne Wren in the chat at the beginning of the webinar. They said, I think the various traumas that we are collectively going through is resulting in lower turnout across the board at community events. Wondering how we can help turn the tide.
Jessica or Miguel, any initial thoughts?
I'm so sorry. Can you repeat that question?
Yeah. So Adrienne Wren asked, I think the various traumas that we are collectively going through is resulting in lower turnout across the board at community events. Wondering how we can help turn the tide.
I just have a quick thought about that too. Sometimes we don't tend to advertise these meetings, but sometimes we have like a support kind of therapy session to just kind of talk out what's going on in terms of, you know, the coronavirus affecting the community. Not so much as like, oh, hey, we're going to talk about the big chemical waste dump in our town, or we're going to talk about our, you know, pesticide problem or diesel problem. But we let community members have a chance to kind of vent. And that's what kind of empowers them to keep on attending the Zooms, even if it's just for like 2-3 minutes and then they hop off. Any engagement that we have with that, with them is very important. And we need to show them to that, because they're the reason, you know, in my case, they're the reason I do what I do in my community. I live there. I share there. I have friends and family there. And so that's why we do what we do. And sometimes it's more than just the environment, and we have to check on their well-being, and it does help attendance dramatically if you kind of do those things, like if you have an organization and you're close to your constituents, like, hey guys, we're gonna have a meeting that's just an open space to talk about what's going on in your life, if you need help or anything of that kind of sort. Not necessarily like, hey, like I said, we're going to talk about the environment. So that's just a strategy that we've done as well on a more local level for Green Action.
Yeah, we, you know, I think it's on a slightly different level, you know, coming from a state agency where we tend to maybe don't have the connection to be able to provide that kind of an offering, or people wouldn't be comfortable with it. I think we just have to think internally if we should have the meetings. I mean, thinking about where people are mentally in their capacity, if they're dealing with the pandemic and the fires and brutality, I mean, it just piled on, right? And if we're feeling that, and then maybe they don't have a job or they don't have job security, I mean, is it important for us to have that meeting, or can we say, hey, let's take a step back and one, is this the right time? Can we partner with someone else so we can at least reduce the number of meetings that we're having with people? Because obviously things are moving forward, right? We have our work that we want to do, and we need to include people, but does it need to happen now? Or is there another option that we can ask them? And I think we need to try and be a little bit more creative and thoughtful when we're going to reach out to folks, because I think we all are feeling it. And so, and maybe we're all in a very great place to be able to be on this workshop today and have this discussion, but knowing that there's so many other people who aren't, and just being mindful of that. And that's probably just in general for engagement, we should be doing that, but particularly now. And maybe reaching out to groups like Miguel's group to get their feedback and their input before we go forward with something. Is this the appropriate time?
Definitely. So this is Sarah. Two things, and then Avery, I'm going to come back to you. I'm hoping we can sneak in one more question. We are 4 minutes before the hour. I can stay for a few minutes after. I don't have anything immediately after this if we want to answer a couple more questions, and if other folks do, but we know we'll lose people. But there's a couple things I want to touch on given some of the things I saw in the chat, especially with that original question that I asked about what are you hoping to get out of this? And a lot of people put tools, and we also had questions about like the external polling tools. I want to make sure everybody here knows about IAP2 and NCDD. So IAP2 is the International Association of Public Participation, and NCDD is the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation. And then on the video page, on day 2, it's the first thing in the afternoon. So for those of you who've looked, the conference videos we have in 2 chunks, the morning chunk of video, the afternoon chunk of video. The very first thing on day 2, afternoon, was our kind of like speed dating resource catalog, where all these organizations nationally highlighted all the free things they have for you. So if you missed that, go back and look. And if you aren't already involved in an IAP2 chapter, there's a Sacramento region one, which I help co-lead. There's a Bay Area one. And then there's a Southern California one. They're very active. It's super easy to find, and you don't have to be an official member. That's one thing. And then the other thing that hasn't come up yet today, and Jessica, I don't know, might be putting you on the spot, but the other thing we've talked about is budgets, and how a lot of the things we want to do aren't traditional budget items because of COVID. And one thing that can be a not traditional budget item could actually be doing a snail mail mailing. And snail mail mailings at an internal organization, they can be a little expensive, but it could really be a good move because it's a great way to really reach people. So one thing that we don't have a lot of time, but we're all thinking about is how do we push those we work with to approve some of these things that we want to pay for that weren't budgeted because we didn't know this pandemic was coming. Jessica, do you want to add on to that?
I wish I had a solution for it, but I don't. I think that, because, it's running into folks that are saying, let's use more technology, right? We have these sources, let's use this technology. And then we have the people saying, but wait, and I would point out, I think it was in 2019, PPIC did a study on broadband internet access, which we need to effectively participate in Zoom meetings. And it's like 75% of Californians have access to that, which sounds fantastic, 75%. But when you look at the state of California, that means 10 million people don't have access to it. So that sure sounds a lot bigger than when you think of the majority. And so if we're missing 10 million people, and we need to get to them, the price of a stamp for a mailing, we just need to really balance those things. And the more that we can, I think, just communicate with people and share these insights, it's really helpful if people like Miguel can help us to see it as well, right? Because we can continue to say it, but unfortunately it makes a much greater impact when we're hearing it from the communities, so I think it's this joint effort if we can come together, to work with people. But I'd be curious to find out if other people are having success in their organizations, balancing budgets with these issues.
So we are right at 12 o'clock. So if those who need to drop off, we want to say thank you so much for coming. We hope you will be checking out these materials and resources, and you can always reach with follow-up questions. Avery, was there maybe one other question for anybody who can stay that you would like to elevate?
Yeah, so sort of because the theme of this webinar is continuing the conversation, I'd love to hear from each panelist about what they are seeing happening, are excited about, are worried about in the next couple of months, the kind of stuff they think will be talked about at the webinar we have 6 months from now, because this is the one 6 months from the June conference.
Miguel, you want to go first, or Jessica, either one of you?
I'm sorry, I was reading a question on the chat. What was that?
Yeah, just because sort of the theme of this is continuing the conversation from back in June to now. If we have a webinar like this 6 months from now, what kind of stuff are you excited about, worried about, anticipating in the next few months, in this space?
In terms of like the virtual, I just hope that there's some kind of resource we can use to lower community members' internet, or just increase their ability to connect to high-speed internet. Because, for example, here in Kettleman City, you have two options. You either have to have a mobile hotspot by a cell phone carrier, which is very expensive, or you can connect to the school's internet. So school districts in our area offer Wi-Fi off their towers, but it's restricted. So not every web page will open, and it's very slow in terms of, where it should be at for DSL speed. So it's hard to work around that, and I'm hopeful that there will soon be like a resource or a way where we can make that more accessible to the community members that need it.
Yeah, we're actually right on the same page. I think we're looking at just that community capacity building piece, how we can play a role in supporting getting that information to people. Do I think it'll happen in the next 6 months? I don't know. I'm hopeful that it would happen in the next 6 months. We have a lot of community partners that we're working with the water boards to hopefully get some of these pilot projects in place. I saw somebody in the chat said they suggested calling things pilot projects to get a little bit more buy-in within your organization. And that's a great idea. And I know that we have some things working that way as well, but I'm hopeful that people are becoming more comfortable with these methods and being more thoughtful. So looking at, again, like collaborating a little bit more to lower the number of meetings that we're actually having and making them the time more useful for people. So this is a great opportunity to do that, right? We can connect with other folks from other agencies from a state perspective, and also local groups to find out how do we come together to share our information and educate people and keep them involved and let them communicate with us.
Also, I would like sorry, just one more thing to add. I did add our Green Action handle for Facebook on there. I have to work on the Instagram one, and I don't want to grab it off my phone and take up the time. But that's another thing that would be helpful for the future, is if we all follow each other on social media, because that just gives us way more power and way more reach to get our message out there to everyone. So if you're able to, please follow us on Facebook for more content. Thank you.
So we're at 12:04. It seems like we should wrap up, but I do think, Miguel, you get the award for your dog being so cute. And I don't know if you can make your dog show in the screen a little more. And the last thing I'll say, in the chat function for the 120 of you who are still here, and given the last question that Avery brought up, oh my gosh, so cute. Hi.
He's
So
a handful,
cute.
Definitely.
Oh my gosh, he's so cute. Okay, in the chat, because someone just brought up, like, what would the webinar be 6 months from now? Has this been a useful webinar? We just guessed even putting this together because we wanted to make sure people knew about the videos being up. Would you want us to do another webinar like this in 6 months and ask the same question? How would we do it? Should we do it different? What feedback do you have for us? And as you put that into the chat, Avery, any last thing you feel like we can't live without? Otherwise, I'm going to ask Miguel and Jessica to say a farewell sentence.
In the Q&A, Bryn Lindblad has a pretty specific question about door handle hangers. So if anyone has insight into that, that could be useful. So the question,
I would start with like, anytime I've ever done one, everyone talks about how it's like the greatest thing since sliced bread. So I think they're fantastic if you have the budget to print them and humans who can go put them on. All right, Miguel and Jessica, let's wrap up. Say some last thing to everybody.
I'm going to jump in before Miguel because I'd like him to have the last word. But I would just say that anyone out there who has wants to discuss further or anything like that, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. My email is on the PowerPoint slides that I think we're going to be sending out to everyone, and happy to chat further. Miguel?
I just want to thank everyone for this time and space and the ability to be on here and talk about our community and how we engage. So thank you, everyone. Definitely shout out to Sarah and everyone else involved in this. Deldy, I know she's not on here, but thank her. I would just like to leave saying I hope everyone follows us. And if you guys do need help in the future, we will be putting things on through the Central Environmental Justice Coalition's Facebook page. So you'll find that on the Green Action page as well if you do follow us. We're going to start trying to do like trainings on this kind of stuff. So follow us for that. And thank you, everyone, once again.
Great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate everyone being here. And for me personally, to see so many people participating who I really know and work with, and I miss you all so very much. So this is such a nice way to feel connected. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.